This week on Quality Digest Live, is your manufacturing management system suffering from the old bump and grind?
Plus, using data to create great user experiences. That and more when we come back.
Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for March 11th, 2016. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Dirk Ducharme, Editor-in-Chief of Quality Digest.
And I'm Quality Digest publisher Mike Richmond. Well, there's many factors that go into whether or not any national economy can successfully compete or continue to compete on the international stage. Things like a country's tax base, its bond rating, its political system, or its population's average educational level or life expectancy can all have significant effect on the long-term economic success or failure of that country. Another major factor, which sometimes goes overlooked, is the physical infrastructure of the nation in question. And it's this very issue, which is pretty much hiding in plain sight right here in the United States. That's the topic of The Road Taken, a new book by Duke University engineering professor Henry Petrosky. We linked out to the book review from the Duke Today website in Monday's issue of Quality Digest Daily. You can actually see the book, The Road Taken by Henry Petrosky, right there. Now, this is unquestionably, I think, a major issue, especially in a presidential election year, as we are here in 2016. But it doesn't seem that many, if any, politicians running for office are talking about this issue. And this, despite the fact that the American Society for Civil Engineers is reporting a C+ grade for the state of the nation's bridges, which is, of course, a mediocre grade at best. But it sure beats the heck out of the D grade that the society assigns to the state of U.S. roads. I mean, those are pretty lousy grades.
Yeah, in California, this
might be worse.
Really
yeah,
nasty.
It's really bad. And for a nation with the resources of the United States, I mean, actually, those grades are kind of shameful, I think. And Petrosky says that the situation is improving, mostly due to technological advancements in road and bridge building and repair. The short-term picture, however, is really not very encouraging because, in his words, quote, "We're not all in it together for the same end. There's a lot of selfishness in the process," end quote. Selfishness and corruption and scandal and just plain old poor decision making. It's all in there in the book. It's described in the book. Petrosky talks about it. And those of us who are U.S. citizens really, I think, should keep this issue front and center because, after all, if the nation's weak physical infrastructure isn't addressed, it's ultimately going to hurt the ability of industry in this country to compete and to win in the hyper-competitive world economy of today and tomorrow. And I mean, this is an issue. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into whether or not, as I mentioned, an economy can do well. You don't think so much about bridges and roads and other physical infrastructure, but it's a sign of a nation, of a society's commitment to making things work better. I think it indicates that there's broken processes in industry too, if your physical infrastructure isn't really slicked out and done properly. So it's a pretty important issue, I think.
I saw a science, I can't remember what it was called. Didn't Obama, during his, I think his first term, start, matter of fact, I think it's fall of the financial crisis, start some sort of program that was actually geared towards money towards refurbishing roads and infrastructure,
Yes.
and it was, I think, also part of economic redevelopment, development,
and recovery.
And
it's a drop in the bucket. I don't remember exactly what the number was, but it was not a lot of money relative to the money that went to other things.
Right.
And you look at some of these things, and you hear the stories about bridges in West Virginia.
But it's not
or
sexy.
Wherever.
It's like it's roads,
and bridges. But
who wants to talk about it?
I know, but it's important. I mean, it's important, and you also talk about commerce. A lot of commerce in this country flows over the roads. I mean, it hurts the ability to have an even equal flow of commerce across the country if these things aren't taken care of. So. Right. It is an issue. It's an issue I think that's important, and I think it does definitely touch on the industry and economy. So as always, of course, check that out. There's a link out to the story and the book link in the story links that are right below our player page right down there.
Seems to me there's a lot of employment opportunity there.
Sure.
I mean, if you really were to put money into working on infrastructure, I mean, think of all, engineers, union workers in terms of construction and heavy equipment and all that. I mean, it seems like there's a big jobs opportunity there as well.
I think there is, no doubt about it.
All right. Well, the American National Standards Institute, that's ANSI, is presenting a free conference, Open Source, Open Standards, Open Minds on Friday, April 15th, 2016 at the FHI 360 Conference Center in Washington, D.C. The event will explore open source and its impact on the standards community. And we're talking about open source standards. It's hosted by ANSI in partnership with American University and the George Washington University School of Law. McCoy Smith, patent, intellectual property, and open source attorney at Intel, will give the keynote address, and there are three what I think are interesting panel sessions following the keynote. The first is industry impact, where panelists will describe how open source is already influencing the direction of their products, systems, and services. The second panel discussion is the right tool for the job, traditional standards, open source, and hybridization. And it will feature panelists who are working effectively in both the traditional and the open source environments to develop standards. And then the third panel, IPR policies and the business of standardization, will address how intellectual property rights, that's IPR, intellectual property rights, policies, and business models have been impacted by the open source environment. Some interesting people are going to be here. Confirmed panelists and moderators are Coate Hall and Stewart, LLP, Gesmer Updegrove, LLP, Google, Intel, the Internet Engineering Task Force, a standards developer, that's the IETF, Microsoft, Oasis, the Open Interconnect Consortium, W3C, and Zynoden PLLC. The event is free, and all interested stakeholders, including those from standards developers, consortia, government, industry, business, and consumer groups, and academia, are encouraged to attend and share their expertise and their experience.
Yeah, it's open source standards are important. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, the development of this, people can really weigh in on what they need out of standards, and ANSI does a good job of taking the lead on things like that. Right,
and I got to say, open source is a very nebulous term. Mm-hmm. Open source is whether a standard's open source or not is kind of or an open standard's dependent on its cost, whether the community or how much the community is involved, mm-hmm. Licensing fees, is it a democratic process? The more you lean one way or the other on those, mm-hmm. the more open or less open it is. So it's not like it's always easy to say this is an open standard and this is a closed standard. There's this big continuum in between, and that's part of what's being hammered out right now, is just how much accessibility is there to standards, which are really important to industry.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. Good stuff there. So
and by the way, if you're interested in this, you can find more information following the link below on the player page.
Yeah, check that one out. That's good stuff by ANSI. ANSI always does a good job of things like that. So, great. Thanks, Dirk. Alrighty, well, A Bump and Grind by Bruce Hamilton appeared in Wednesday's issue of Quality Digest Daily, and we cover Bruce a lot in Quality Digest Daily, and to start with, I guess we really should talk about the term bump and grind, Dirk, and you know what bump and grind is, right? I mean, you know what that refers to?
No.
You've never heard of the old bump and grind?
No.
Well, I'm gonna tell you all about it here, Dirk, just in case you haven't heard from me before. Well, in this case, bump and grind refers to a rather dubious tactic. It might be dubious in the other usage as well. A rather dubious tactic that's used to assess broken manufacturing.
Manufacturing. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm on track. Okay.
Yeah, bump and grind.
I was thinking the other bump.
Yeah, no, not that one. In essence, what's going on here is that you bump hot jobs. Jobs that are needed to be getting out really quickly ahead in your work queue. And mostly you do that to satisfy large or cranky or high profit or some combination of all three customers. It's really kind of a Band-Aid, and it's intended to impose kind of a semblance of lean on a non-lean system. So you bump those things up or down in your queue depending on basically how cranky the customer is. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. So if you have a customer that's really upset about long lead times, you say, all right, well, we got to get this job out fast. So we'll do that job and we'll get it out the door in 2 weeks, rather than say a month or 2 months, as the case may be. And again, Bruce is talking about a case 30 years ago, early in his manufacturing career, and eventually that organization became a real lean organization as time went along. Well, as you could probably understand, this really doesn't work really well. The intention of lean, of course, is to create flow across value chains, and bumping and changing and grinding your way through these jobs. It actually leads to a lot of waste in the process. You have to pick and choose which jobs to do and in which order. It requires a lot of superfluous effort. And in the piece, Bruce talks about the efforts that went into that, right? They had to come up with little tags and stickers and codes for this, and dollar signs represent a high value job, and different things, and they had meetings all the time to try to, every day they were having
basically
meetings.
a system to thwart the system.
Right.
Yeah, right.
And the funny thing that happened is, customers really caught on to this, and they started to game the system. Like, they had a thing where if you paid a premium, you would get your job done quicker, right? So people that needed 10 things, 10 parts, would pay for one. Would do one as the premium price, and the other 9 they'd be the regular price. And of course, they put those jobs as the same part. So
Sure,
they put them together, ship them together at the same time. So even though you paid the premium, only 10% of them you get your whole order. I mean, people would game the system that way, because customers aren't dumb. They know what you're doing. They know what you're trying to do, and you're trying to game your own system. So why shouldn't they game your system too, right? I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Eventually, you really aren't gonna satisfy anybody by doing this. And what happens again is, those customers are the most cranky, that are the biggest, that are the ones that you really want to keep, or new customers that you want to try to make a good first impression on. They're always going to kind of float to the top of the queue. And what's going to happen is those patient, good, long-term customers that don't pipe up and
right.
aren't the squeaky wheel, never get their stuff. I mean, their stuff comes 2-3 months later, whatever, and they're like, well, they're not going to be happy.
Yeah,
with that.
and you're betraying that relationship too.
You are, yeah, and you're betraying your own system is what you're doing, and the relationship just suffers as a result. Well, Deming said that such systems, and Bruce quotes this, such systems were perfectly designed to produce these kind of results. Davis Balstracci says that a lot too, by the way. It's a quote I like. Your system is perfectly designed to get the results that you're getting, and that's what happens. Bruce tells a story, and basically the system was designed in such a way, and it really wasn't designed. It was designed, but it wasn't designed. It was designed to have a lack of design. And what happens there is planning. You're planning to have no plan. You design to have no design. You plan to have no plan. So as a result, there's chaos. There's no flow. And again, this is kind of a Band-Aid, make it up as you go, firefighting approach to manufacturing. It never works. It's not going to work long term. It's not going to work short term. And even if it appears to work in the short term, long term you're going to fail, because again, you're going to have dissatisfied customers. Backing up a step on this whole thing. You think about why you manufacture stuff, why you're in business. You're in business, right, to deliver value across your organization to your customers. And in some way, shape, or form, if you're doing this, if you're bumping and grinding, if you're moving jobs up and down the queue, you're guaranteeing that you're not satisfying somebody along the way, right? And it really is just a Band-Aid. It's a Band-Aid for what should be done, which is to get rid of that entire system and start from the ground up with a flow system, based on everything flowing the way it should be in time and getting out the door in time. If you do it that way, everybody's happy. Every job is the same thing, right? And you have flow throughout the organization. But if you don't do it that way, you've got to put these Band-Aids on the system in some way, shape, or form to try to satisfy those people that are the most cranky. It's not ever going to work.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason this happens, though, too, is it's easier, or it's perceived to be easier, to start doing these Band-Aids.
Yes.
Than it is to go back and revamp the system. Oh my gosh, we're going to have to shut down the plant and retool the line, and we're going to have to have this major disruption so we can start doing things the right way. Yeah. Well, who wants to do that? Let's just use a series of tags and develop a system to work around this.
Yeah.
And it's basically laziness, I think.
It is. It happens all the time.
Yet it makes more work for you.
It does in the long run, and not even in that long of a long run. I mean, you think about it. I mean, if you spend an extra hour each day, an extra man hour each day doing these fixes and whatever, which is not going to make people happy anyway, because the meetings or whatever, the wasted time, you could, again, shut down the plant in a week, maybe reform out the entire thing. So yeah, you lose a week, but you lose a week once versus an hour every day.
Right, exactly.
So eventually you're going to pick up that time pretty quickly. And it's a good point that Bruce makes. And again, the moral of the story is eventually they did become a lean system, a truly lean system. The story was from 30 years ago. The story he's telling is about 30 years ago. So
just as true today for a lot of plants, I guarantee you.
Absolutely, no doubt about it.
All right. Well, there was an interesting article this week in Knowledge at Wharton titled Pinpointing the User Experience, How Data, Not Just Design, Help Companies Create Successful Products. And it primarily focused on the user experience with digital products, consumer digital products, online apps, mobile phone apps, websites and the like. But really, in my mind, has a lot of applicability to other products as well. So for our audience, I mean, let's say in industrial products, or maybe even more specifically, let's say capital equipment measurement products, metrology products, because that's probably what most of you are going to relate to. But I would say, manufacturing equipment, CNCs and whatnot. So it all comes down to using data to tailor the customer experience. Now, we all kind of understand this on the consumer level. I mean, you look at something like Netflix. So if you're a member of Netflix, you know that they give you hints as to other movies that you might like watching. They kind of monitor what you do, and based on what you do, they make other suggestions. Amazon does the same thing. You buy certain products. Well, the next time you go to Amazon and log in, oh, here, you bought this, you might be interested in this. So this is kind of tailoring the user experience based on what they've done in the past. So that's data. That data is being collected. Ford and other automakers are doing the same thing. They are collecting information, both electronically on how your car is used, as well as surveys and so forth, and they use that to fine-tune what's coming up for new products in the future, and Ford is really advanced at that. But this is actually even true in industrial products. I mean, we have heard from many measurement hardware producers that, and we'll leave them unnamed, but we've heard from probably most of them that, honestly, their hardware isn't any better than their competitors. Spec-wise, accuracy, so on and so forth. Honestly, and I can't tell you how many tell me this, is that, they all work about the same. They're all quality products. They're made really well. They'll last forever. They're accurate. The differentiator is customer experience, both on the user experience, the operating the equipment, and of course, customer support. That's the differentiator anymore, and it's true in industrial products, industrial capital equipment products, as it is in consumer products. Everything is becoming a commodity, and now what separates you out is your user experience. And that is why actually a lot of larger companies actually have a UX department or a UX person whose sole responsibility is user experience. I mean, I've met with this guy several times, Milan Kosic, user experience business development manager at Hexagon. UX is in his title. And I've seen other companies with the same thing. If you see a UX in their title, that means their job is collecting data and trying to figure out what is the best way to fine-tune equipment, the software, the hardware, to give the best user experience to their customers. And the goal, of course, is a personalized user experience. I mean, that would be the holy grail, and that takes just a lot of data. So, as I said, in consumer digital products, Netflix, Amazon, Pandora, this information is collected, let's say, via the registration process. They may ask you a lot of questions, and by having access, with permission hopefully, to your real-time data. Where are you on Earth via GPS? Where are you on the internet via cookies? Where were you on the internet? And so forth. And this allows vendors to kind of tailor their offerings specifically for you. So we understand that in a consumer business to C world, in the B2C world. But I want to look a little bit at how this plays out in the B2B world as well, because it does. It's happening in the B2B world. Wharton points out that there are 3 key areas in shaping the customer experience. There's segmentation, audience segmentation, relevance, also context, and rewards. And I really want to explore the first 2 in the industrial context. So first of all, let's take a look at segmentation. In our world, the world of quality, you have to understand all the key stakeholders in a technology, whether we're talking hardware or software. And how might you do that? Well, pre-sales. I guarantee you, anybody who sells capital equipment, they have an extensive pre-sales survey or questionnaire, maybe just one-on-one with the customer. What are your needs? You're going to spend $100,000, $200,000, $1 million on a piece of equipment. We want to make sure that we give you the right thing. And who are the different audiences? Well, you might have, if you're talking, let's say, audience segmentation, one of your audiences might be the shop floor operator, the other, and who has certain needs. The other audience might be the programmers who go in and program a CNC, who program a CNN, who program a robot, whatever. Well, that's a slightly different audience, and they have slightly different needs. You might have a manager. They're not going to operate it or program it at all. They just need data, production data. How many units were tested? What were the results of those tests? Was there any downtime? They need all this. So their experience has to be different again. So you have your pre-sales questionnaires, and of course all that feeds back into design and configuration. That's only at the front end. It's important. Obviously it's important. But what about ongoing? And this is where consumer products are really good and where industrial products are slowly getting, and this is the next important thing, relevance or context. And again, we understand from retail consumer interactions what that means. But in industry, what's it mean? Well, it's the same thing. What is the operator doing at this point in time? Does that change the user interface he or she is presented with? And how do you collect that data? Well, the Internet of Things is one way, and we're seeing more of that. The equipment is all connected, so a certain amount of information can be collected from the equipment. But it doesn't necessarily give you operator information or real-time operator information unless they log in. But was it really that operator who logged in, or did somebody else log in by that operator, or using that operator's credentials? Well, now you're getting stuff like video. So, a video camera. This is Mike operating this machine. What is the specific user experience that we have to give Mike? Well, Mike only gets a certain set of menu instructions. Okay. Now, Mike leaves, and Mary shows up. Video camera recognizes Mary. She has permission to operate this machine. She has a higher level of access. She can do different things. The user experience changes. It could even change the physical configuration of the machine. Is this person tall or short? Does the machine adapt to their height? Okay. We've talked about it in the past, collaborative robotics. So the robot starts to watch via video how an operator is working and adapts what it's doing, or maybe how the machine is operating, based on subtle changes now on how that person is interacting with the equipment. And this is really where UX is going, where user experience is going in the industrial world. It's not quite there yet. Some of these things are being done, but we're seeing more and more of it, where the equipment is modifying itself and changing the user experience based on who is using it. Right now it's basically at the broad audience segmentation, but you're going to see more and more happening on the actual individual user experience. It's understood by retailers, certainly by the hardware companies we deal with. It's a big differentiator, and to a lesser extent, all these companies are putting time and energy in developing a positive user experience for your shop floor folks. I mean, it's fascinating stuff. It's what's going on with this is really cool, and a lot of people don't know that there are people whose job is UX.
UX.
Or look. Oh, there's some. Yeah, I've even seen CEOs of or vice president of UX or whatever it is.
Chief UX officer.
Chief UX officer. Cunks.
Exactly. But I mean, whether it's user experience, customer experience, whatever you want to call it, I mean, essentially it's that idea of trying to walk the journey of who your user is, who the person is that's using whatever it is that you're providing to them, and figuring out a better way to do it. What struck me when I was listening to you go through that story when I read it was this idea that all these pieces have been there for a long time. The video pieces and the ability to embed cookies and understand what people are doing and where they are and how they're using it. But this idea that you're now stitching it together and putting it together into one module. I mean, heck, maybe we'll even get rid of managers someday, right? Why? You look at the Toyota production system, you look at Lean. I mean, going to the Gemba. The reason you go to the Gemba many times is you want to try to understand exactly what the process is being done by the operator. Well, maybe now, heck, it can be monitored, it can be adjusted on the fly. So it's like, why do you have to go to a Gemba? The machine is doing the Gemba for you, and all of a sudden, hey, they're making the adjustments that need to be made. Interesting stuff.
The MIT robotics group is actually doing a lot of interesting stuff with collaborative robotics. It's just you can Google that.
Yeah.
Some good stuff.
Check that out. All right, thanks, Jerry. All right, well, we're going to talk about innovation now a little bit. That was an innovative story. We're going to go a little further with innovation. A Stake in Innovation by Peter Dzikis appeared in Wednesday's issue of Quality Digest Daily, and we just were talking about MIT. Dzikis is a writer for the MIT News website, where this piece originally appeared late last month. Well, in his article, Dzikis discusses a study co-authored by Alexandra Kasperzek, an associate professor at the MIT Sloan School of Management, along with Caroline Flammer, an assistant professor at the University of Western Ontario. These two ladies worked together on a study which was titled The Impact of Stakeholder Orientation on Innovation, Evidence from a Natural Experiment. And it reveals that little-known state laws can have big effects on the quantity and the quality of business innovation. And you ask why, and I certainly ask why. I'm like, scratching my head, how does that work? Well, these laws are known collectively as constituency statutes, and they exist in 34 US states. Statutes of this nature permit, and you really can even say when you look at it, they really encourage directors of corporations to consider interests beyond those of just their shareholders in the financial decision-making of the company. These stakeholders include employees, customers, and environmental protection groups, among others, and all of them have interests that can and should be considered by those steering these companies. And
aside from the actual shareholders,
just the shareholders. So in these 34 states, these constituency statutes say that you can, and by inference should, consider the needs and the interests of these stakeholders. Well, a quick aside, of course, when I read this, I thought about it. Simple math then will tell you that there's 16 states in which the interests of non-shareholders do not, in theory, matter one whit in terms of charting the financial course of a given company. Now, that doesn't mean that those interests are not considered at all, but it merely means that there's no legal framework protecting any interests beyond those purely profit-driven ones of the shareholders. So you can make of that what you will. But I just thought that was interesting. I'm like, at 34, it's like, kind of makes sense. And wow, there's really 16 of these that just don't even acknowledge that. Huh?
It's all about the shareholders.
It's all about the Benjamins. Okay. Right. Well, but returning to the states that do have constituency statutes on the books, the way this works in connection to innovation is really rather interesting, as the study finds. It turns out that these laws raise the rate of patenting by 6.4%. In addition, the number of citations per patent filed in states with constituency statutes increases by at least 6.3%. So not only do these laws drive more patents, the ones that come out of these companies were more original and they're more influential. They're cited more.
They're cited. That's what they meant by citations. So they're good patents. They look interesting, and people are tying into them.
They're important patents.
Okay.
They're just not just a lot of patents. Are just all patents are important. But I mean, some patents are more important than others, and these are really important, original, influential patents. So the question that the authors of the study seek to answer, of course, is why? Why does that happen? Why do these constituency statutes drive more patent activity? And better patent activity. And the co-authors mentioned three specific possibilities. The first is that these companies are not simply considering the interests of stakeholders, they are actively seeking their feedback. They're not just considering it, they're going out to ask, how can we work with this? How can we do our jobs better? And especially they're pinging those consumers. And particularly they're doing this in the realm of new and innovative products and services. In other words, they're really making their customers partners in innovation. So they're actively working with people that are using their stuff and saying, well, how can we do it better? So they're getting really good ideas because they kind of have to consider the interests of those stakeholders, right? Really important first point. The second point is being able to consider interests beyond those of shareholders. Generally, those are folks that want to see companies grind out those short-term, quarter-by-quarter revenue and profit increases is incredibly freeing. Innovation and new product development is usually a long-term play, and being able to see the big picture and at least somewhat take your foot off that 5% year-over-year quarterly earning accelerator can lead to innovative bonanzas, and perhaps maybe can double or triple or even quadruple the value of a company in a decade or less. So think about that. Think about the two approaches here. Think about the one where the shareholders are basically behind the wheel all the time, unquestionably. We want to grind out quarter by quarter increases. We want to see that share price go up. We want our dividend to increase. Now that might be 5% a year, so it might be like 1% per quarter, year over year, right? I mean, that's good. I mean, over the long haul, it's not too bad. But I mean, think about that versus the riskier proposition of we're really going to drive innovation, and we might double or triple or quadruple the value of the company over 10 years.
Right.
Which would you rather have? Of course, you want to have hit the home run. You strike out a lot that way too. But I mean, so when you take your foot off the gas of shareholder value as your primary thing, you can focus on that longer term benefit. And third and finally, the authors of the study mentioned that constituency statutes help ward off hostile takeovers. Corporate raiders, usually they're interested in coming in and grabbing control of the company and wringing the maximum value out of it in the shortest possible period of time. And they usually do that by breaking it up into its component pieces and selling it off. These laws force the consideration of broader perspectives, which often makes such a strategy untenable. So taken together, it makes sense that statutes of this nature are really pretty good ideas, and they help ensure that corporations are way more sustainable in every way, and not the least of which is in the long-term profitability. That's what I really like about this, is this a long-term play. Shareholders are, they're pretty short-term people, like I say. I mean, they're thinking quarter by quarter. Well, when you have constituency statutes in play and you kind of are forced to consider broader things, you look years or decades in the future and you look at, well, we have to innovate and we want to support our employees in innovating too. That's a big part of this I didn't really mention, is that when you do that, you encourage your employees to innovate and to play and to figure things out. And again, they're stakeholders too. So they're not shareholders usually, but they're stakeholders. So when you get away from having to do that quarter by quarter dance, big benefits can come from it, and constituency statutes are a big part of that.
Yeah,
so
good stuff.
Good stuff from MIT News.
There we go. All right, well, it's time for Tweet of the Week.
That's right.
And this week's tweet comes from Marasasta. Marasasta. If you tell a joke in the forest and no one laughs, was it a joke?
Yes. It just was a big
I always laugh at my own jokes.
Well, there you go.
So it's never an issue.
There you go. I think that then you just answered your own question.
Of course it's a joke. I'm laughing.
That's right. Well, that's great right there. I mean, if you want more funny stuff, along with quality and management and standards and metrology, everything else, visit
We're
us
fun guys.
at Quality Digest at Twitter. All right. Well, that's it for this show. Thank you all for joining us this rainy here in Northern California Friday. We will see you all next week for another big week of Quality Digest Daily, and we'll be back here next Friday with QDL. So join us then.
See you then.
Bye.